They say there are myths older than the Imperium, stories whispered before Terra ever knew fire, before mankind learned the cruelty of survival. In the vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, sealed beneath layers of dust and dread, one such legend endures. A tale of a warrior who defied the heavens themselves, who butchered gods, who shattered Olympus and left eternity bleeding. Across dead tongues his name has 1,000 echoes, but in the black libraries of the Ordo Malleus, the scholars call him only one thing: the God-Killer. No one remembers when the first whispers began. Some claim Imagos archaeologists uncovered them on a world long abandoned beyond the halo stars. Others say the rumor crawled through the warp itself, an echo from a reality that was never meant to touch ours. What matters is not where it came from, but what it dares to ask. If a being once existed powerful enough to slay gods, then what would happen if that same fury turned toward the Golden Throne? The machine choirs would fall silent. The custodies would draw their blades, and somewhere beneath the mountain of mankind's faith, the Emperor, corpse or god, might finally open his eyes. So stay, subscribe, share this chronicle, and descend with us into the forbidden archives, where myth and faith bleed into one another, and where even gods can die beneath the hand of man. And before we begin this descent, tell me, where in this vast galaxy are you watching from? Which city, which world, which corner of Terra do you call home? I taste metal through the Vox grill before the storm shutters close, a thin tang of recycled iron that means the hold is about to bite atmosphere. I brace my augmetic hand against the bulkhead and whisper Binharik to calm the machine spirit as the explorator barge shudders into the gravity well of a nameless world in the halo reaches. The cogitator runes call it Theta Null 7. I call it silence. Planets like this remember things the Imperium prefers to forget. I am Magos de Varn of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and I have come to harvest a rumor. We make landfall beneath a sky the color of oxidized copper. The Skitarii vanguard fans out in disciplined lines, ochre dust whispering around bionic ankles as their galvanic rifles pivot toward the ruins. A manufactorum once stood here, if the broken ribs of adamant and the blackened bones of furnace towers are honest witnesses. Now the girders jut like the teeth of a dead kiln, and the wind plays hymns through them. A thin music that scratches at my implants and sets the lumen arrays flickering. Servitors unload Auspex pylons. They move with the steady, penitent rhythm of beasts broken to holy purpose. The air smells of promethium ghosts and the faint sweetness of long-baked insulation. I log the stimuli without judgment. Data is prayer made useful. The vault is exactly where the orbital strata maps predicted, a sunken aperture beneath the skeletal remains of a transit spine. Its blast door is older than anything above it, layered ceramide and banded adamant alloy etched with sigils I do not recognize. The script is not High Gothic, nor is it any of the Dark Age dialects our new spheric libraries keep beneath encryption. The glyphs are curved and violent at once, hook-like characters that seem to resist the eye. I order the Skitarii to secure a perimeter and extend an Auspex umbilicus toward the lock plate. The machine spirit within is a wounded animal, proud, starving, still dangerous. I soothe it with catechisms. It answers with a hiss like a blade leaving a scabbard it has outgrown. When the vault exhales at last, the dust smells like rain that has forgotten the sky. My sensorium overlays paint the corridor ahead in ghostly wireframe. Pick-capture cherubs hum awake and flutter into the dark, their lenses winking like small devotions. I could send servitors first, but some doors punish timidity. I step forward with a torch sensor swinging, incense burning in a measured cadence that maps the airflow for my Auspex. And then we see them. Panels of stone, no, not stone, some composite I cannot identify by smell or microshave. Each panel is engraved deeply, each line cut with a confidence that affronts entropy. The pictographs repeat in spirals and ruptured columns. They are not decoration. They are a record. I walk the length of the chamber, the Skitarii's footsteps a soft counterpoint behind me, and I feel something I had not expected, the discipline of the artisan who made these. Not merely skill, certainty. The certainty of one who believed he was carving the end of something. I place my palm against a panel and let the Auspex in my glove taste the surface. The feedback shocks me. Not electrical, mnemonic. The glyphs are storing a pattern in the eddies of their cuts, a kind of analog code written in the physics of texture. I whisper a prayer to the Omnissiah and begin to read. At first, the images that spill into my mind are nonsense, a surge of broken frames and impossible colors. Then the rhythm resolves like a cogitator finding a lost clock signal, and the frames settle into sequence. A mountain taller than city stacks, crowned with temples and cruelty. Figures of impossible beauty feeding themselves to a sky that answers in lightning. A man bound in chains that glow like suffering, a blade that is also a memory of victory. A pair of short, brutal axes that drink light and return it as violence. The code repeats itself with variation, as if sung by different throats over centuries. The chorus remains, and the chorus is a name I do not yet have the language to pronounce. The Skitari find the second chamber while I am still shaking off the aftershocks of translation. It is narrower, more intimate, a chapel built by engineers. Here the panels change character. Less chronicle, more confession. In one, a bearded warrior drags a god by the hair down a stair of thunderheads. In another, he stands with a woman whose grief is a hurricane carved in 3 planes. In a third, he slaughters a sea that tries to love him. It is not chaos I am seeing. There are no 8-fold sigils, no twisting anatomies that betray the ruinous powers. These divinities do not warp space. They warp manners. Their sin is not mutability but arrogance, and the man who defies them carries a fury that looks in this frozen light like freedom's ugly twin. I order a full lumen bath. The chamber blooms into daylight, and the picked capture cherubs sing at last, excited by the feast. Their lenses drink. Their wings stir eddies of dust that hang in the air like incense. I transcribe, annotate, whisper oaths to the machine spirits, and every oath returns with a question. What do you call a man who kills gods? The Mechanicus has many terms for the precise disassembly of a faulty idol: decommission, depower, denounce. But no word at all for a human hand around a divine throat. We build sanctity from repeatable outcomes. Divinity is simply a circuit you cannot close. Here someone closed it. Hours pass in a useful fugue. Time is a set of stacked trays I pull and slot as needed. When fatigue becomes a measurable impediment, I rack it in the background and continue. The third chamber waits like a heart. Its door bears no glyphs, only a single mark brashly cut into the composite, a vertical gouge intersected by a short slash, the primitive memory of a letter. I touch the edge and feel heat under the surface as if the composite resents the wound. When the door recedes, hydraulic sigh sweet as confession, the room within reveals the thing I did not know I was hunting, a reliquary. It is simple. A plinth, a field of transparent, perfectly preserved air around it. Stasis or something like it. On the plinth, 2 objects lie at rest. The first is a broken chain link thicker than my wrist, pitted with old stress, its fracture face polished by a ritual touch. The second is a fragment of something that could be a blade, too crude to be called a sword, too deliberate to be a shard. My auspex hums in confusion. The readings are paradox. Mass does not match volume, surface does not match wear. The fragment is older than the dust in the seals that kept it. I lean closer, and for a heartbeat I do not hear the Skitari moving or the servitors muttering their work litany. I hear surf, then a scream that might be wind, then a voice that pronounces a single syllable with the weight of a verdict. I am not given to visions. My flesh is rationed to purpose. My brain runs mostly under machine governance with an allowance for art. But when my eyes meet the shard, my remaining wetware betrays me with the human talent for narrative. In the shard I see a man whose skin is a map of oaths and betrayals. In the chain link I see a promise broken on purpose. I know then, with a certainty as irresponsible as love, that these are not decorations. They are evidence. I authorize the ritual to lift the stasis, and my voice does not shake. The Skitari form a perimeter so tight the air squeaks. 2 servo rigs descend like mechanical saints, pincers poised, mag clamps singing. We lift the chain link first. It is heavier than its denial of mass suggests. It wants to be a burden. The fragment we lift second. It wants to be a decision. I seal both in sanctified visglass and turn to the cogitator dais to record a preliminary theorem. It unrolls itself in my mind with frightening elegance. If a mortal hand can end a god, then divinity is neither absolute nor essential. If a mortal hand can end a god, the emperor's hunger on the golden throne is not an inevitability but a chosen economy. If a mortal hand can end a god, then the Astronomican is a lighthouse built not by a sun, but by a man who refuses to die. I do not write those words. I let them smoke in the air above the data slate and vanish before they can be caught. Heresy can be a fog that looks like breath on a cold morning. It is easy to pretend it came from someone else. Instead, I send a clean report. Non-Gothic inscriptions set exhibiting mnemonic encoding. Composite material unidentified. Artifacts retrieved for transit to Mars Priority Archives. Local threat index benign. Environmental entropy favorable for long-term preservation. I include a fragment of the pic capture, no more than 3 frames. In those frames, a man drags a god downstairs carved into lightning. I want to see who answers. They answer quickly enough to taste. The Inquisition arrives like thunder with its teeth hidden. 2 ships slip into high anchor above Theta Null 7, their silhouettes swallowing starlight. Vox traffic becomes suddenly polite. Too polite, as if the sky is now a cathedral and everyone is whispering to avoid offense. I am ordered to hold position. I am ordered to surrender the relics. I am ordered to keep my Skitarii where they can be counted. I comply, but not before I make a copy of the mnemonic code in the panels and hide it in the Auspex litany for the incense burners. The most secure places are those nobody believes can lie. The inquisitorial shuttle kisses dust outside the vault. It opens like a sermon, and a woman steps down in robes that drink the light. Her face is the sort of calm that means she remembers every life she has ended as a number. Magos Daivarn, she says, voice filtered by a Vox grill that does not pretend to be gentle. You have found a story. Stories are waste heat, I reply. We collect it for power, she smiles, faint and terrible. We collect it for obedience. She walks past me into the vault as if the air belongs to her. I watch her eyes trace the panels without moving. She recognizes nothing and everything. That is their kind's trick. Do you believe any of this? I believe the panels are what they are, I say. And the artifacts are older than our taxonomy for age. And the subject? She asks softly, almost merciful. The man who kills gods. I believe, I say, and here my voice chooses truth because lies are less efficient in the long run, that a myth is a machine built to do work. This one is doing a great deal of work on me. Something like approval crosses her face, though it may only be the reflection of a lumen filament dying. She nods to the visglass caskets. These travel with me, she says. Your copies of the inscriptions travel with me. Your Skitarii remain here until we finish our sweep. My Skitarii are not servitors, I say before wisdom can throttle the syllables. They are soldiers of the Omnissiah. Then they will enjoy the discipline, she replies. And that is the end of that. Night comes in increments because Theta Null 7 no longer remembers how to turn its face properly. The inquisitorial team moves through the vault with the confident boredom of professionals who expect the world to behave. They find nothing I did not show them, and one thing I did not expect. A collapsed stair beyond the reliquary that sinks into a room whose roof is a single slab of mirror black material. It gives back our lumen in a way I do not enjoy. The Inquisitor, she has not told me her name and I have not asked, steps to the center of the room and raises her hand like a priest at benediction. The mirror coughs up light. It is a Pict, but not like ours. It blooms in the air, a volume of images shaped like an amphora of smoke. It shows a man from the waist up, his skin a topography of old violence, a red mark seared across his flesh. He has the posture of a fallen tower that refuses to admit collapse. In his right hand, something like a blade radiates a light that does not illuminate the room so much as edit it. In his left, an axe with a cruel head and a handle short as a conviction. He is not beautiful. He is not monstrous. He is inevitable. Kratos, says the Inquisitor, and the word finds my cochlear augmetics already labeled for it, as if my mind was waiting for a handle. In one tongue among thousands. A god-killer, the Pict sputters and dies. The mirror sucks down the lumen again and leaves us in a generous dark. I hear my Skitarii breathing through their respirators. I hear the servitors murmuring the catechism of safe stowage. I hear the Inquisitor's pulse steady as planetary time. Your report will say this vault contained unknown cultural detritus and an inquisitorial unit disposed of it, she says, and her voice does not rise. My report will say what my data says, I answer, because I am tired and because I am human enough to enjoy defiance when it fits. And my data says there is a name now. Her hand hovers near the pistol at her hip. Then it drifts away, an economy of mercy. Magos Daivarn, she says. You are astute enough to understand that some stories will obey the Imperium and some will demand to be obeyed. If this myth is only noise, we will burn it. If it is a signal, we will triangulate its source and kill it where it lives. And if it is neither, I ask, if it is a mirror we cannot stop from showing us our own face? Then we will learn our face, she says, and remove the parts that make treason easier. I file the conversation where I file pain, a datum and a teacher. We seal the vault behind us. The dust resumes its slow empire. The inquisitorial ships lift. Their shadows flood the ruins like a held breath. In my shuttle, I request permission to ascend. It is granted with the kind of politeness that means there is now a note by my name in a ledger that is not supposed to exist. When the barge claws back into orbit, Terra is very far away, but the thought of it fills my sensorium like a remembered heat. The Astronomican burns. I do not need auspex to know it. It burns because it always burns. The beacon that spares the Imperium from becoming a fleet of lost children. I imagine it for a moment as a lighthouse tended by a man chained to its heart, fed by a choir that prays in equations. I imagine for a moment that is purely a sin. What would happen if a hand like the one in the mirror found its way to that lighthouse and tried the lock? In my private noosphere, where only the most loyal of my machine spirits are permitted, I build a model. I feed it what the vault taught me. Gods as machines with appetites, men as machines with choices, chains as systems that justify themselves by calling the alternative chaos. The model produces a sound. Not a word exactly, a suggestion of a word. I close the model and say nothing, and the silence tastes like the inside of a reliquary in the dark. Weeks pass before I am summoned. The summons does not come through the usual channels of the Mechanicus, where ritual precedes reason, and reason must genuflect before hierarchy. It comes through a voice, flat, mechanical, and old enough that even my data slate struggles to translate its harmonic decay. The transmission is routed through 16 relay stations and marked with a sigil I have never seen, a hand bound by serpents, each biting the other's tail. By order of the Holy Synod of Terra, the message intones, "You will bring your findings to the cradle of mankind. You will not speak of them to any soul. You will not dream of them. You will not die until commanded. No Magos denies such a call. Even the dead obey it. The journey is long. Across the void, my vessel sails through warp currents that tremble with the pulse of the Astronomican, a heartbeat in the dark. Each surge of psychic light refracts through the ship's shields and stains the bulkheads gold, as if the Emperor himself watches us. I think of the vault beneath Theta Null 7, of the relics and the Pict, of the name the Inquisitor spoke aloud like a sin she could not swallow. Kratos. The word feels heavy in the augmetic parts of me, as if the machine rejects it. I isolate the discomfort, analyze its pattern, and fail to dismiss it. When we reach the Sol system, the void is not silent but disciplined. Orbital defense rings glint like rosaries of steel. The Emperor's light makes everything unreal. The void, the ships, even thought itself. The Martian fleet hails us, questions us, prays at us. Then the Terran beacon demands we kneel. And so we kneel, through thrusters, through orbit, through gravity's sermon. The surface of Terra is a wound that never closes. From the stratosphere, it looks alive. Veins of light, arteries of industry, cities piled upon cities until geography becomes an idea. The palace dominates all, a mountain of devotion plated in gold and despair. I am brought through endless checkpoints, each more absolute than the last, each custodian's eyes more ancient than logic. I am scanned, dissected, absolved, and escorted to the Hall of Archives where silence itself has rank. The Inquisitor is already there. Her armor glimmers faintly beneath her robes, and her presence warps the air like static. I notice then that she no longer wears insignia. She has become something less official and more dangerous. "You brought the data," she says. It is not a question. I hand her the encrypted vial. The sigil on it flares briefly, recognizing her palm print as if it remembers being afraid of her. She inserts it into a relic console that predates the heresy. Lenses bloom, light refracts, and the holographic memory of the vault unfolds around us in ghostly fire. The panels glow once more, the warrior's figure etched into the darkness, defiance cast in every line. The Synod has argued for days, she says quietly. The Ecclesiarch calls it heresy, the Mechanicus calls it proof, the Custodes call it impossible, and the Inquisition, she looks at me, a thin line of amusement in her eyes, calls it a test. Of faith? I ask. Of imagination. She steps closer to the projection, her gloved hand passing through the light of Kratos, dragging a god to ruin. Tell me, Magos de Varn, what does this mean to you? Her question is a trap. Every answer is dangerous, so I choose the only kind that matters. It means the universe may not belong to gods at all. It may belong to those who refuse them. She regards me for a long moment. Then she gestures and the air trembles. A group of figures steps from the shadowed periphery. Priests, psychers, a custodian whose armor drinks the light. They circle the projection like mourners around an unburied truth. One of the psychers begins to chant softly in high Gothic and the hologram flickers. For a heartbeat, the image changes. Not Kratos now, but something else. Something immense and golden, seated upon a throne of cables and bone. The Emperor. The two images overlap. The God-Killer and the God-Emperor. One red and mortal, one gold and eternal. For a single instant they align and the chamber's lumen systems short. Sparks fall like dying stars. The psyker screams. The hologram collapses. When the lights return, the custodian has his spear half raised. You tamper with the throne's reflection, he says, his voice a blade. No, the Inquisitor answers softly. The reflection tampered with itself. They argue in the aftermath, ritual words, theological armor, but I do not hear them. I am still watching the after-image burned into my retinal augmetics. The two faces merging, God and man, fury and divinity, wrath and burden. I remember the Pict's whisper, the sea, the scream, the verdict. And I know, though I cannot admit it, that the vault was never buried to be forgotten. It was buried to be found when the Imperium forgot what defiance looks like. Later, in a cell meant for reflection, but built for containment, I open my noosphere and find an unsanctioned transmission waiting. No encryption I recognize, no source identifier. Only a voice, calm and deep and human in a way that makes my servos hesitate. Magos Dai Varn, it says. Tell them I am coming. The signal ends. The lights dim. Somewhere in the palace's heart, I swear I hear the faintest tremor, like the intake of a breath beneath mountains of machinery. And above it all, the Astronomican flickers. There is no record of the exact moment the sky above Luna split. No scribe can agree on the order of events. The data fragments contradict one another, each more impossible than the last. Some claim the rupture began as a ripple in the void, a distortion that made the stars tremble like reflections disturbed by unseen hands. Others insist the Emperor's light faltered first, flickering in the Astronomican's core before the warp howled in reply. Whatever the sequence, the effect was the same. The heavens opened, and something older than faith bled through. It began as a vibration. A bass note felt more than heard, rolling across the solar void and shaking every hull in orbit. Vox traffic turned to static prayers. Servitors froze mid-chant, their machine spirits paralyzed in the face of something they could not translate. On the surface of Luna, within the red-walled bastions of the Helios defense complex, the custodes received the first coherent images. A tear in the Imperium, crimson at its edges descending like a wound that refused to close. Inside it, a figure, naked save for the chains that coiled his forearms and the burning ash of what might have been a sky. The warriors of the 10,000 had faced demons that screamed entire cities into madness. They had stood against traitor primarchs whose shadows could drown suns. But none of their lexicons could name this intruder. His descent was not teleportation, not warp breach, not any sanctioned form of translation. It was as though the universe itself had grown tired of containing him. The impact crater glowed for hours, its perimeter fusing into glass. When the first custodian entered, he found the intruder kneeling in the center, breathing slowly, each exhalation scattering dust like incense smoke. The air around him shimmered with heat, yet no fire burned. In his hands rested two weapons that did not belong in this reality. One was a blade that hummed with divine refusal. The other, a short-handled axe whose edges pulsed as if remembering old gods. He looked up, and for the briefest moment the custodian saw not an enemy, but a reflection of purpose. The man's eyes were not mad. They were weary, as if he had climbed through eternity only to find another altar waiting. When he spoke, his voice carried through the vox of every witness, no translation required. Where is he? No one dared answer. The custodian prime raised his guardian spear, its blade gleaming like a sun caged in auramite. You stand upon sanctified soil. Identify yourself, the intruder rose. He was not tall by Astartes' measure, yet the gravity bent around him as though acknowledging a greater mass. I am looking for the one who calls himself God. The custodian's reply was steel. The chamber ignited with the sound of propulsion engines and the gold shimmer of shields locking into place. The first strike came like lightning, a downward arc of divine craftsmanship honed over 10 millennia. The stranger caught it with a chain-wrapped wrist. Metal screamed. Sparks became meteors. He moved like memory, inevitable, brutal, precise. The custodians were perfection incarnate. But perfection is a slow thing, designed for ceremony as much as slaughter. The intruder fought as though each heartbeat might be his last. Every swing an argument against creation itself. He broke through their formation, shattered a halberd, and hurled its blade into the wall with enough force to carve scripture into stone. The Vox filled with reports from orbit, energy signatures exceeding Titan-grade weaponry, kinetic readings violating conservation laws. The fabric of reality itself groaned, and in the data streams carried through the Mechanicus relays, Magos de Varn, saw it happen. My sensors could not comprehend the readings, so I filtered them through metaphor. The machine spirits called it anger made visible. Within the first minute, 8 custodians lay broken. Not dead. Death would have been mercy. But displaced from reason, their gene-coded armor crushed inward as if the air itself had betrayed them. Yet the God-Killer was bleeding too. Each wound he suffered burned with pale light, his blood evaporating before it touched the ground. The Custodian Prime signaled for orbital reinforcement. Above them, the battle barges of the Adeptus Custodes charged their lance batteries, ready to scour the entire site if necessary. Then something happened that stopped even the firing sequence. The stranger knelt. He pressed his hand to the lunar glass, closed his eyes and whispered words no translator could bind. For a moment the temperature dropped. Every servoskull froze mid-flight. Every auspex returned null values. Through the open comms I heard the whisper of waves, real waves impossible on Luna, rising and falling in rhythm with his breath. Then came the sound of chains tightening, a resonance that seemed to reach into the marrow of thought. When he stood again, his weapons blazed. The axe flared crimson, the blade gold, and for a terrible instant their lights mingled, red consuming gold, gold consuming red, until both vanished into white. He turned toward Terra. Even across the void, the Astronomican pulsed in response. Every psyker within range of the beacon screamed. Ships veered off course, navigators bleeding from their eyes. I recorded the waveform and found a pattern within the chaos, 2 heartbeats overlapping. One vast and ancient, the Emperor's. The other mortal, furious, unfamiliar. The God-Killer had arrived, and Terra, sleeping beneath its monuments, began to dream of him. The High Lords convened within hours. The Inquisition silenced entire orbital stations to contain panic. The Mechanicus prayed in confusion. I was summoned once more, dragged from my data crypt into the war rooms of the Imperial Palace, where custodians stood like gilded pillars of patience. "He is not of chaos," the Inquisitor said, voice sharp as a scalpel. "He is not Warpborne. He is not ours, and yet he challenges the throne." "Then what is he?" asked the Fabricator General's envoy. Her gaze slid toward me. "You unearthed his name, Magos. Tell us." I met her eyes. "He is consequence," I said. "For gods who forgot what men are capable of." Outside the palace, the void burned white where Luna once was. The bloom that blinded the void was not annihilation but revelation, a saturation of light that erased contour and shadow until instruments and eyes alike reported absence. When the glare thinned, Luna remained, pitted and glassed where the intruder had landed, scored by heat that left auramite runes molten in their housings. The Custodian Prime stood amid the cooling crater with a spear that had tasted a paradox and found no vocabulary for it. The stranger had already begun to move. He did not flee, he did not posture. He set one foot toward the distant curve of Terra, and the ground gave way to his intention, as if distance were a rope he had decided to pull. We threw doctrine at him. Gravnets fell like invisible rain, locking layers of compacted mass around a frame that should have stilled any Titan. He shrugged and a ring of dust lifted from the ground and hung there, each grain briefly a planet of its own before falling again. A null maiden of the Sisters of Silence stepped forward and the air around her went thin, as if meaning itself were being evacuated. Beings of the warp retch in such presence, their edges come apart. The stranger did not dissolve, but something in him flinched. His weapons guttered to mere steel, his breath turned suddenly human in the Vox. He looked at her like a man seeing a shoreline he had once despised and longed for anyway. When she advanced, he yielded a pace not out of fear but recognition, like bows offered in old grudges that never learn to die. Then he turned and broke the gravitic cinctures as if the weight they offered were an insult, not a prison. We tightened the ring. Jet bikes tore cobalt arcs through Luna's thin sky. Telemetry chattered with trajectories, impact solutions, absolutions pre-written to be recited over collateral if collateral dared to exist. He moved again, a straight line toward the black seam of space, and the custodies did not permit straight lines. A phalanx tilted to adjust, and he took the angle and made it his. The chain at his wrist whipped and sang. A rider fell without a cry. Machine and man corkscrewing into the glass. The axe in the stranger's left hand found a shield and made a lesson of it. The blade in his right carved nothing visible at all and opened a custodian along a wound that had been waiting for him since the day that armor was forged. He could have killed more. That is what undid us. He pressed instead. Every stroke purchased momentum. Every break in our geometry bought him another meter of vacuum. A teleportarium beam spiked the horizon, one of ours misaimed by interference. And for a moment its column of particulate light crossed his path like a ladder thrown by a god with bad timing. He took it. Where a lesser thing would have been shredded into rumor by the misaligned strata of the beam, he locked his weapons across his body, clenched every grief he had ever owned into his muscles, and stepped into translation as if stepping through surf. He vanished from Luna in a twist of air that smelled like iron and oranges and old rain. He arrived within the defense lattice encircling Terra with a contempt for permission that made mathematics look small. Auto turrets found him. The machine spirits inside took aim with loyalty and sorrow. The first fuselage should have turned him into a beautiful cloud. Instead, the rounds deformed, their purposes curdled, trajectories turning away as if ashamed of what they had been asked to do. The Vox went white with noise that had too many bones in it to be called sound. He tore through a maintenance conduit the size of a cathedral nave, and was gone into the maze before the lattice could articulate a second question. For the first time in decades, the palace heard its own heart. Sirens dug their nails into stone. The pennants along the walls quivered as if remembering real wind. The Adeptus Custodes flowed inward, not as panic but as thickened resolve. The Sisters of Silence spread like lines of subtractive ink through the routes we calculated he might take, their silence joining shadow to shadow. We saw him in bursts, picked feeds that caught his shoulder, the white of an old scar, the heat haze of his passing. Each sighting left lenses stuttering and servitors kneeling, as if their machine spirits had decided worship was the safer choice. I stood in the war room with a cogitator choir, screaming corrected predictions at my spine. The Inquisitor watched the hololithic map with the kind of stillness that does not waste any blood on pretending to be calm. "He is not a storm," she said to no one and to me. "He is a verdict." The Custodian Prime, recalled from Luna with a speed that accused distance of negligence, tilted his spear, the blade catching and returning every lumen the chamber offered. "Verdicts are passed here, not brought," he said, and there was nothing proud in it. Only duty polished until it reflected the faces of the dead he had sworn to honor. The stranger struck the old mechanisms beneath the western bastions like a hammer, correcting a mistake. Those passages were never meant to be known again. They predated names for some of the parts of the palace that used them. He followed pressure, heat, the current of breath moving through lungs the size of trains. He passed a reliquary whose guardians had no word for him and chose not to waste one. He entered a hall where Skitari of a household legion stood like punctuation marks in a sentence written in iron. I should have been with them. I was not. I watched through their eyes as they shot him, and learned that accuracy multiplies nothing when the target is the wrong question. A sister stepped into his path, and the world stopped. I do not mean the air. I mean the arithmetic. Nullfield saturated the stone. The Imperial Aquila carved in the wall behind her lost its certainty, and looked like an animal briefly. The God-Killer paused, and at last something that could be called expression moved across his face. Not hatred, not fear. Fatigue that knew it would win anyway. She did not speak. She did not need to. She removed the warmth from the corridor like taking a cloth from a table. His blade became only a blade. His axe became only an axe. He came on regardless. When he reached her, he slowed. As a man slows when he touches the sea he was born beside and left for reasons that were right at the time. Then he stepped around her, not because he could not break her, But because breaking her would have answered a challenge he refused to dignify. By then the palace had considered and then accepted an option it kept buried as a mark of humility. The Grey Knights breached in, silver like the memory of a sky no one in the Imperium remembers without lying a little to themselves. They came without heraldry and with all the ceremony that belongs to inevitability. There was a toll in the air when they walked, a bell you feel in your ribs. They were not sent to kill him. No one sensible framed it that way. They were sent to measure him against things we have learned to fear with education. In the high galleries, choirs turned to prayer and found their words dragging copper through their throats, but still they sang. In the tunnels, the knights closed and the stranger smiled with something that was not pleasure. He recognized the principle. Men who had set themselves to a purpose ugly and clean. They engaged at a cross vault where the stone remembers thunder from a war 10,000 years old. Blows fell that would have broken tanks open like wet fruit. Wards flared. Purity seals burned down to wax and ash. Thunder hammers kissed ribs and called old ghosts to watch. The stranger bled and grinned and learned the weight of their intent. They bled and learned the weight of his history. One knight took the axe and did not fall, and in that instant they had each other's respect, which is a kind of friendship only warriors and certain machines are permitted to have. It did not slow him. Respect is not a shackle. He bent the fight to angle and leverage and made distance always distance, always the next door that pointed toward the center. There were moments that will become reliquaries if we survive. A custodian disarmed with a gentle twist that left his life intact because killing him would have been waste. A chapel passed through without a glance where saints wept oil and the candles guttered in obedient terror. A voxcaster torn from a wall and crushed until its prayers turned to breath. Through all of it, he husbanded his strength the way a miser husbands light in a city that taxes candles. He arrived at the inner gate not because we failed him, but because he would not accept our success. The inner gate is a contradiction. It is a door and a continent and a day of the week in a calendar that predates meaning. It recognizes the blood of the emperor and the hands that hold it in trust. It does not open for strangers. The stranger put his palm against it and the metal sang low. Not assent, not refusal. A note you get when two truths are in the room and neither is willing to kneel first. He breathed once. He lifted the blade that is a refusal and the axe that is a memory. And for a heartbeat the lights in the Sanctum Imperialis dimmed, as if the palace were closing its eyes before the blow. The blow did not land on the gate. It landed inside it. Metal that had never learned to yield rediscovered the meaning of the word and shrieked, not in pain but in astonished recognition. The gate flowered open a fraction, just enough for sound and light to trade places. Every lumen inside the Sanctum Imperialis dimmed to amber as if dawn were attempting to be born where dawn had no business. For a heartbeat, perhaps several, the palace remembered the sound of a man demanding entry without permission from eternity. The god-killer stepped through. Behind him the custodians closed ranks, their armor dulled by the echo of what they had just seen. Ahead lay corridors not measured in distance but in reverence. The air grew thick with prayer, with the scent of oil and myrrh and 10,000 years of candle smoke. Walls alive with circuitry murmured fragments of litanies. Statues wept condensation that glowed faintly in the dim. Every step he took stirred dust older than empires. I followed from the data feeds that still functioned, riding the crippled sight of machine spirits that tried to focus and could not. He walked slowly now, not because resistance hindered him, but because the silence expected him to. Each breath he drew condensed into mist that drifted upward and refused to dissipate. At the edges of the corridor, picked records flickered into life, centuries of triumphs, martyrdoms, coronations. They winked out one by one as he passed, as if ashamed of their certainty. At the base of the throne stairs he stopped. He looked up, and though no mortal lens could capture what he saw, the sensors described an intensity that bent spectrum and patience. He spoke not loudly, but with the cadence of verdict. I have climbed mountains of ash. I have drowned in the blood of those who called themselves eternal. I have torn the heavens that chained me. Show me your divinity, the air answered. It did not speak. It manifested. Light poured from the seams of the world, filling every carved relief of the emperor's visage, turning icons into suns. The throne itself vibrated with a pulse that every auspex in orbit registered as seismic. To the adepts monitoring, it looked like resurrection. To the priests praying, it felt like confirmation. To me, alone in my cogitator chamber, it sounded like a conversation finally beginning after 10 millennia of waiting. The god-killer raised his weapons. The light raised its gaze. The moment before collision lingered, terrible, reverent, inevitable. There are moments when history inhales. The Sanctum Imperialis held that breath as light and will reached for one another like blades crossing in a cathedral. What followed was not battle in the way war remembers itself. It was a grammar of force exchanging cases and tenses until meaning changed clothes in front of everyone watching. The first strike belonged to no man. The throne exhaled. The aura that sustains the Astronomican pressed outward through the miles of sanctified cabling like dawn being poured into veins. The flood struck the intruder as a tide sweeps a cliff, unending, weight without edges. He leaned into it, feet digging dust from stone older than Terra's first cities, and answered with motion rather than defiance, stepping sideways so the surge slid past him and spent itself on empty air. The hall shuddered. Statues cracked. A fresco of the Emperor's triumph over the beast of Ulanor shed gold like autumn leaves. The custodians came in after, not as a wave, but as a vow. Their auramite drank the light and returned it calmer. Their footfalls rewrote the rhythm of the hall. They did not scream, they did not boast. Their silence named the intruder enemy more completely than any proclamation. He did not oblige them with conversation. The chain at his wrist sang an old song as it looped one spear and drew its wielder forward. The axe met the haft not to break it, but to turn its own momentum against the bearer. A shield slid in. A blade traced a bright arc and he was already elsewhere. His sword cutting a seam between moments rather than through men. When he did strike flesh, it was with a precision that left lives intact and pride ruined. A custodian fell to one knee, helm ringing where the chain had wrung it. Another found his weapon gone and did not know when he had been disarmed. They adapted. Of course they did. The 10,000 are a school that never closes. Their formation flexed to a geometry the stranger had not yet taught himself. A triad pinned him from angles that made distance expensive, and the fourth drove in like punctuation at the end of a sentence that could not be argued with. He took the blow on the flat of his sword and the impact thundered the length of the hall. Candles went out in rows. I felt it in the cogitator vault beneath the western bastions. Relays stuttered. Servitors clasped their hands as if to keep their machine souls from spilling, and my own augmetics vibrated until I tasted metal and the memory of rain. The sisters moved next. Their null fields braided together until the light dulled as though humility had been forced upon it. In that subtraction, the stranger's weapons lost their radiance and became only iron and edge. And still he worked them as a mason works stone with a hammer. He inherited from a father who taught him the patience of righteous anger. When a silent sister stepped close enough that even memory thinned, he slowed, not in weakness but in courtesy, as a man might soften his voice beside a grave. He slipped past her without a wound, and the null's wake left him briefly smaller, more mortal, more imaginable, which made him more terrifying than any demon I have ever recorded. Above the clash, the throne's radiance altered key. What had been steady luminance turned granular, pulsing in beats the choirs could not match. Every psyker in the palace felt their discipline become a blade pointed at the inside of the skull. Several collapsed mouths full of copper prayers. I fed the waveform through every metaphor machine I own. 2 oscillations braided, 1 ancient and stellar, 1 bloody and human, not canceling, not harmonizing, contesting. Where they crossed, reality dragged a foot as if tripping on the hem of its robe. Picked feeds showed it as a shimmer crawling the flagstones. A saint statue wept oil and then wept water, then both, then neither, depending on who watched. The gray knights arrived from the flanks like an argument we had been saving for a decade. Their plate was a monastery hammered into armor. Their war psalms made the air itself kneel. They moved in syllables, each blow a line in a liturgy that expects the listener to convert or break. The stranger met them without irony. No demon-quelling wards hissed at his skin. He learned them the way craftsmen learn a tool by surviving its instruction. A hammer that falls like a planet found only chain. A blade that had cut heresies from the warp found itself parried with a tension so complete it felt like respect. One knight caught the axe on his pauldron and slid, the stone gouged under his greaves. He rose laughing, grim, shaken, alive, and the stranger's mouth twitched in acknowledgement. It passed. Nothing soft stayed. In the galleries, the ecclesiarchy had begun their last resort. They listened. When faith fails spectacle, it retreats to hearing. Their ears took in the battle and taught themselves theology from its music. Later they would write canticles about the rhythm of those blows. the way iron and will conversed in a tongue they pretended they had always spoken. For now they were very quiet men with very old books, holding their breath like everyone else. The Inquisitor stood among them and did not pray. She watched the pattern of the stranger's footwork and the cadence of the thrones, pulsing in the roots the custodians, chosen saw a third thing in the spaces between. Not conquest, she said into my private vox, and I did not ask how she had found the channel. Petition, I looked again. The evidence was there, obstinate and embarrassing. He could have killed more and did not. He broke lines to move forward, not to tally victories. His worst wounds he courted only when the path narrowed to a single answer. He wanted past us. The Custodian Prime understood at the same instant. I saw it in the angle of his spear as he shifted from annihilation to containment. He signaled, and a corridor of gold opened and closed around the stranger like a lung. In that breath he reached the first stair. The throne answered as a star answers the physics that binds it. Light deepened until it had weight. The floor sang a frequency that made teeth think about leaving. My cogitators wrote new columns for numbers they had never needed before. The Astronomican wavered across the void. Navigators wept. Entire flotillas lost their way by half a degree and would spend the next year paying the interest on that error. In the Sanctum Imperialis, the stranger planted his feet on the stair and met the weight with a simplicity that felt like profanity. He lifted his blade that says no and his axe that remembers, and he climbed. I wish I could claim that we broke. We did not, we bent. It is worse because bending means we learned to live with what should have killed us. The choirs forced their song back into harmony with the throne's altered pulse. The custodians set their bodies to the math of the steps and found purchase. The Grey Knights bled into their seals and made the ink bite harder. The sister's silence grew finer, until it cut not him but the space around him, trimming possibilities like a gardener trims branches to force fruit. He advanced all the same, slower now. A man walking through a memory that wants to keep him. Halfway up, a thing happened that no scripture admits. The light, not all of it, not even most, but a sliver sufficient to be a scandal, tilted toward him as if curiosity had always been part of its nature and we simply had no word for it. He stopped. He looked up into the burn where we cannot look and said nothing at all. The quiet around that unsaid word lengthened until I thought I might crawl out of my skin to escape it. He climbed again. At the last landing, where the stone is older than the idea of mercy, the air became thin and loud, like the moment before a storm that will unmake cartographers. The Custodian Prime stepped in, last measure, last man, the Emperor's own oath given legs and lungs. He barred the way without theater. The stranger regarded him as one mountain regards another, respectful of the time required to grow. They moved together and apart, blows measured, no waste, no cruelty. When it ended, both were blooded. Neither bowed, and the path remained, narrow, terrible, open. Beyond, the final ascent waited, and the light behind it ceased to be illumination and became attention. The Emperor's light was not warmth. It was verdict rendered in radiance. It filled the throne chamber until the marble sweated and the air took on the texture of ground glass. The custodians braced. The choirs screamed hymns that cracked their own throats. The stranger, this god-killer pulled from forgotten myth, kept climbing as if light were weather he had endured before. Each step dragged a shudder through the palace. I felt it in the iron bones of the data vaults beneath the Himalaya. When he reached the dais, the throne woke. Its cables tightened like serpents roused from ritual sleep. Every conduit in the mountain glowed with arterial fire. Around the chamber, saints sculpted from gold seemed to breathe, their eyes flickering as machine spirits mistook devotion for command. The stranger looked up into the solar blaze and for the first time hesitated, not from doubt but recognition. He raised his weapons and their light, though dimmed by the sisters' null fields, answered like loyal hounds called home. The Custodian Prime approached behind him, blood drying on Oramite. "Kneel," he said, voice breaking under the strain of holiness. "Kneel before the master of mankind." The stranger did not turn. "I have knelt before gods," he said, and the echo of that statement went through the palace like a stone through glass. Then the throne spoke without words. The sound was pressure. Every mind in orbit tasted it. An image of Terra seen from above, continents shaped like wounds, oceans burning at their edges. A second image followed, hands human once, now wrapped in light, reaching outward not to strike but to remember. The god-killer's expression changed. It was almost pity. The first clash of divinity and defiance came not with noise but with absence. The light folded inward and left a vacuum shaped like an idea too large for creation. The void pulled at everything. Banners flayed, relics turned to dust. In that silence, the stranger's sword rose, tracing a line that shimmered crimson-white, and met the light descending from the throne. Contact made sound again. The palace howled. Across the Imperium, astropaths dropped to their knees. Bleeding phrases none would recall. The Astronomican flickered, its beam twisting through the warp like a serpent startled from slumber. Ships veered, systems dimmed, yet no one died. The beacon did not fail, it changed tone. I saw none of this with my eyes. I felt it through the machine spirits, through the trembling of logic engines that wept static. For an instant their code rewrote itself to include wonder. I think that is what faith feels like when it realizes it is not alone. The custodians could not approach. The pressure between the two beings tore geometry itself. Those who tried found themselves walking through time that refused to keep pace with them. One stepped forward and returned 10 heartbeats earlier, his own corpse standing in his way. They learned stillness. They watched. The stranger roared. Not rage, not challenge, but an old grief unburied. The roar carried the names of worlds he had destroyed, the gods he had murdered, the family he had buried under necessity. The light answered with a chorus of 10,000 saints, the sound of 1 billion prayers condensed into one impossible note. When they met again, the explosion tore the dome from the Sanctum Imperialis and flung it into orbit as a burning crown. From the void it looked like sunrise, then silence. The throne dimmed. The stranger stood amid ruin, his chest rising, his weapons dim, their light absorbed. The custodian prime stepped forward, spear lowered not in threat but disbelief. The Emperor's body, if it could be called that, sat motionless. Its golden armor cracked along lines that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat returning to duty. Between the two figures hung a single filament of light, neither red nor gold but the color of reconciliation. The stranger reached out as if to touch it, and the light vanished. A wind passed through the chamber, real wind impossible within those walls, and when it cleared he was gone. Only his chain lay on the steps, coiled like a question waiting for an answer. In the aftermath, every lumen in the palace reignited. The Astronomican stabilized, stronger, sharper, its pulse steadier than before. The Inquisitor later called it refinement. The priests called it mercy. I called it evidence. The Emperor still sat upon the throne, but the light that surrounded him was different, less absolute, more aware. I reviewed the data later, alone among cooling engines and the soft sobs of burned cogitators. The recordings contained one final frame before corruption, the stranger turning his head as though hearing a voice behind him, and the faintest curve of a smile that did not belong to victory or defeat, somewhere, perhaps beyond the warp, perhaps only in the echo of the machines that survived. A new frequency began to hum, deep, steady, human. In the hours after the dome returned to orbit as a burning crown, Terra discovered that silence can be louder than triumph. The alarms died. The smoke settled. The choirs, bled white by their own discipline, slept without dreams for the first time in years. In that quiet, the palace felt unfamiliar, as if the Sanctum Imperialis had shifted a degree upon its mountain and none of us could name the new alignment. The Astronomican pulsed, a steady, exacting heartbeat that my instruments refused to call stronger because that would imply improvement, and improvement implies the past was less than it should have been. The machine spirit settled for clearer. It is a cowardly word, but sometimes cowardice keeps engines from breaking. I returned to the Western data vaults because the living cannot understand miracles until they have watched numbers take a breath. The cogitators still ran hot, their housings smelling of cooked resin and old lightning. I bled coolant into the racks and listened as the logic engines retold the story in a language they trusted. Amplitude, frequency, phase. A pattern emerged that had not existed before. The Astronomican's wave now carried a low subharmonic, human range, a drumbeat under the anthem. It did not contradict the beacon's function. It annotated it. I watched the annotation walk itself along the conduits like a pilgrim tracing reliefs in a cathedral, a hand over old carvings, finding where the stone had worn thin and thickened there with attention alone. The Inquisitor found me among the towers of cooled metal, her robes singed at the hem, her hair damp with the sweat of men who had thought themselves spectators and discovered they were present. She did not announce herself. Her presence announced her. "You have measurements," she said, 2 words unburdened by the pretense of question. "I have a litany that pretends it is not awe," I said, and called up the renderings upon a hollow slab. The waveforms danced in bruised blues and pale golds, the screen shedding light like confession through latticework. There, the subharmonic. "It is not noise, it is a choice. The throne is modulating, refining," she said, echoing the word she had offered the High Lords as if trying it on a second time to see if it fit tighter. "And the God Killer?" "Gone," I said, "or not elsewhere so much as other." I let the machine spirit cycle through the final frame for her again. The chain on the stair, the smile with no category, the filament of light that had been neither red nor gold. If he left a trace, it is in the places where the Emperor's attention has grown curious. She watched the wave for a long time, her eyes moving with the patience of one who has carved truths out of people until truth itself became a habit. "The Custodian Prime says the sanctum is secure," she said. "He says the event is over." "The event is over," I agreed. "What follows is consequence." We moved through the palace, and Tara's skin told us stories without being asked. In the lower chapels where pilgrims are permitted to pretend their prayers reach him, candles burned with flames that sometimes leaned toward the north wall, always the north, no matter how the drafts ran. In the reliquary vaults, the machine spirits in ancient armor woke, one by one, and then went still as if embarrassed by their impertinence. In the scriptoriums, the autoquills paused mid-stroke, blotted nothing, and resumed with improved calligraphy without any change in ink or hand. The Adeptus Custodes passed us with faces like polished patience. The Sisters of Silence stood in pairs where intersections grew too thoughtful, their null gift combing the air into obedience that felt for once merciful. Reports filtered in from orbit. Navigators spoke of a horizon within the warp that looked nearer, while remaining exactly where it must. They used metaphors like sailors again, and some of them wept without shame. Fleets corrected their courses with less effort than their instruments predicted. Out beyond Pluto's unremembered corridors, a patrol found an ossified cult shrine in a hollow comet, and watched as its 8-fold sigils flaked and fell away in silence. None of these things were proclamations. They were small evidences that a hand had passed over the map and smoothed one wrinkle, not all. I recorded them and refused to let my language become a sermon. In the Hall of Archives, I found a priest asleep upright against a column, his book fallen open across his knees. He woke as we entered and blinked at the pages, as if his eyes were remembering how words take turns. "Magos," he murmured, not recognizing the title until his tongue brought it to obedience. "Did he—" He stopped, throat laboring under a question bigger than his bones. "Did anything change?" "Many things," I said, "and perhaps none." It was the truest answer I could give while still deserving my augmetics. "Your hymns will not need new words, only new ears," we continued. At the edges of the sanctum, the damage told its own liturgy. Marble flints down to bedrock, auramite scorched to a dull, thoughtful sheen, frescoes that had learned the cost of pigment. Custodians and artisans and serfs worked shoulder to shoulder under the kind of silence that is not fear, but respect refusing to become gossip. We passed them and entered the penumbra of the throne's presence, a distance you can feel without measuring, the place where the air becomes patient and your thoughts put their hands behind their back. The machine fabric of the throne's support lattice hummed, a note lower than the hearing of men, which makes it perfect for machines to understand. I put my palm to a conduit, and it was like resting a hand against the flank of a great animal asleep but listening. Heat signatures ran steady. Voltage held. And yet within the steady there was appetite, a seeking that tasted of attention turned outward. Not hunger. Hunger is absence calling itself purpose. This was purpose remembering it had a world to attend. The Custodian Prime approached, moving with the sort of pain that means the body has agreed to postpone its protests until the work is done. His spear was newly dressed. His eyes were older. He regarded us without ceremony, and then looked past us to the line of the stairs where the chain had been. A servitor collected the coil with reverence beyond its programming, while 3 adepts whispered over it in Binharic as if gossip could coax secrets from iron. The Prime watched them and, for the first time since Luna, permitted a single sentence that did not feel like a verdict. He left something he meant to take, he said quietly. Either as a promise or a debt. What would you call it? The Inquisitor asked. A door, he said. Not open, but no longer locked as if the lock were ashamed of itself. We stood in that for a while. Words can spoil rooms. Some rooms ask you to stand and let them decide what you have earned. The throne's light was less blinding now, more precise. It fell upon the dais and did not spill. It traced the reliefs and remembered their faces. It avoided the bodies of the workers as if reluctant to discourage them. I made a note and immediately erased it. Not because it was heresy, but because it was a kind of flattery. And flattery is a poor instrument for mapping gods. In the depths below the sanctum, where the conduit forests grow and the machine choirs tend roots that drink prayer, as if it were coolant, the subharmonic I had measured climbed a fraction of a tone. Choir Magie reported it as an ache behind the eyes that was not unpleasant. A sister of silence passed me on a gantry, and for an instant the note vanished. In that subtraction I tasted how loud it had become. When she was gone it returned, and I found I missed the absence like cold water on a burn. I recorded that too. The human preferences of Imagos do not matter to the Omnissiah, but data polluted by disgust or desire becomes rumor, and we drown in rumor already. We were almost to the western transept when the palace spoke. Not the vox, not the sirens. The stone. It gave a tiny sound like a tooth deciding to crack and then reconsidering. Every head turned toward the sanctum as if a wire had linked our necks. The light within brightened by a degree that felt like a question. Is he? The priest beside the column tried again, stumbling out of his earlier sleep. Is he? The Inquisitor lifted a hand. Listening, she said. Or we are. The subharmonic settled. The conduits cooled by a fraction that would not matter to anyone who has not loved machines. The air exhaled. Somewhere deep within the palace, a door that had forgotten its hinges remembered them. The sense of attention did not fade. It redistributed, like a gaze moving from one face to a room and understanding the room was the face. Later, reports reached us from the outer hives. A Habslab in the southern sprawl declared a spontaneous ceasefire between two manufacturum gangs who had been butchering one another in the name of scrap allocations. No one could say why. They looked at each other and put their knives away. On the northern ridge, a pilgrim procession halted as one and changed the rhythm of its song by 3 beats per line, because the old rhythm suddenly felt impolite. On the river that runs beneath the palace, river by courtesy, sewage by truth, the servitor stopped mid-drag and waited until the current smoothed itself by a measurable but untraceable rate before resuming. These are anecdotes, I told myself. The world prefers patterns and will die to invent them. And yet the numbers in the vault, the harmonics in the throne, the attention in the air, they converged upon a single insolent inference, that something vast had not woken so much as turned its head. When night came, it came without stars, the smoke and the ash and the crown of the broken dome still ringing the sky. I stood in a window that used to be a wall and watched the darkness lay itself down like a cloak. The palace did not sleep. It leaned slightly imperceptibly toward the east as if listening for footsteps. I imagined I heard them. The tread of a man who has learned to leave gods behind when they fail to answer his questions, and the answering breath of a god who has remembered that answers matter only if those who ask survive to hear them. The days that followed blurred into a vigil. No new decrees came from the High Lords, no sermons from the Ecclesiarch, no explanations from Mars. All the Imperium could do was wait, and in that waiting, fear and reverence intertwined until they were indistinguishable. Even the sky above Terra seemed to hold its breath, the clouds trembling as if listening for something too vast to name. The Inquisitor moved through the palace like a shadow among the faithful, her presence a quiet reminder that even miracles required accounting. Wherever she went, the custodes followed, not to guard her, but to ensure the truth she sought did not burn her alive. I followed behind them both, my data slates full of graphs that could not decide whether they were mathematics or prayer. We descended into the lower sanctums, where the foundations of the golden throne rooted deep into the bedrock of the Himalaya. Here, beneath the layers of sanctity and superstition, the throne's hum was strongest. The conduits throbbed with new resonance, their rhythms syncopated with the subharmonic tone I had recorded. Familiar now, unmistakably human. What is it doing? The Inquisitor asked quietly, her voice nearly swallowed by the mechanical hymns echoing through the corridors. Not doing, I answered. Becoming, she turned, eyes narrowing. Explain. The throne's power signature is no longer fixed. It's shifting, evolving. The waveform adapts, compensates, corrects itself. It's learning its own imperfections. Her expression did not change, but the silence that followed her told me she understood. When we reached the core's observation chamber, the light that poured from the reactor conduits had changed color. It was no longer pure gold. Threads of crimson wove through it, faint but deliberate, echoes of another presence that once stood before the throne. The God-killer's signature transmuted into the Emperor's pulse. The custodian prime bowed his head. He touched the machine god's vessel, he murmured, and the vessel remembered. Above us, the mountain trembled. For a moment, every lumen on Terra flickered in rhythm, a pulse, steady, deliberate, alive. It spread through the noosphere, through the data streams, through the very song of the Astronomican. Billions of souls, spread across countless systems, felt it at once. A brief silence, followed by the unmistakable sensation of being seen. Reports came from the edges of the Imperium. Astropaths wept, claiming they heard the Emperor whisper, not words but intent. A lost fleet in the halo stars found its course corrected by an unseen hand. On Cypramundi, the Adeptus Mechanicus recorded machine spirits spontaneously purging corruption. And deep within the warp, the beacon of the Astronomican flared with a color no human eye could translate. Half gold, half blood, a bridge between the divine and the mortal. The ecclesiarchy called it deliverance. The Inquisition called it anomaly. The Mechanicus called it data rebirth. But for those of us who had been there, who had seen the stranger stand before the throne, it was something else entirely. Conversation. That night I stood once more before the Sanctum Imperialis. The chamber had been repaired enough to conceal its scars, though the air still carried the metallic taste of recent divinity. The throne sat as it always had, immense, eternal, patient, but its light no longer burned with absolute indifference. It shimmered like thought. I found myself speaking aloud, a heresy in any other place. Did you understand him? The light did not answer, but the hum deepened just slightly, enough for the floor to vibrate beneath my feet. The sound was almost acknowledgement. The Inquisitor's voice came from behind me, soft as dust. He taught you something, I turned. He taught it something. Her gaze lingered on the throne, on the golden husk that still contained humanity's greatest contradiction. A god who had once been a man. Then the question is, she said, what will it teach us in return? Outside, the Astronomican blazed across the night. Every ship in orbit saw the same anomaly. A second pulse layered beneath the beacon, perfectly synchronized, perfectly measured. Some called it interference. Others called it harmony. To me, it was the sound of gods and men learning how to share the same silence. In the vox static that followed, just before the channel cleared, a whisper threaded through the machine noise. It was not loud. It did not belong to any known signal. But I recognized the timbre, the gravity, the exhaustion, and the purpose. I kept my promise, the voice said. And then it was gone. The throne hummed once more, a heartbeat echoing through metal and faith alike. This time the sound was not divine. It was human. Morning returned to Terra like a question no one was ready to answer. The first light bled through the ash-gray veil that hung above the palace, and for the first time in living memory, it did not look filtered through grief. The smoke had thinned. The sound of the manufactorums, the chant of the serfs, even the distant hymns from the ecclesiarchy's towers. All of it moved in the same rhythm, as though the planet itself had found a new tempo. I walked through corridors still lined with scaffolds and incense burners, past marble patched with auramite that caught the light and refused to look ashamed of its scars. The Inquisitor had not slept. She sat in the archive hall amid open data slates and handwritten scrolls, the two media talking to one another like old enemies forced to share a cell. The High Lords have agreed upon a declaration, she said when she noticed me. The Emperor's radiance has stabilized. The Astronomican's expansion is within acceptable parameters. The event is concluded. Concluded, I repeated, letting the word taste its own irony. That's the same word they used for the heresy. She almost smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who knows too many definitions of victory. History needs punctuation, Magos, even when the sentence isn't finished. We watched the reports scroll past. Entire sectors where warp storms had diminished. Worlds where crops long cursed by radiation now sprouted green beneath artificial suns. A forge world that claimed its plasma furnaces burned cleaner without modification. These were miracles measured in data. The Mechanicus would call them anomalies until new litanies could be drafted to sanctify them. The ecclesiarchy would call them blessings until the next famine arrived to prove their impermanence. I asked her, "And the chain?" She pointed toward the stasis chamber beyond the hall. The relic floated there, suspended in its transparent prison. The light from the throne had touched it again, subtly. What had been dull iron now glimmered faintly along its fracture face. Not gold, not red, but a color that implied the two had agreed to meet halfway. "The custodian prime believes it is inert," she said. "I am less sure. Objects touched by myth seldom stay obedient." I approached the chamber. The chain was still, but its reflection trembled as if seen through heat. I placed my palm against the glass, and the sensors in my augmetic skin whispered readings I did not request. Low-frequency resonance, pulse identical to the new subharmonic of the Astronomican. It was listening. Or remembering. Perhaps both. Outside, the people of Terra began to interpret the silence in their own ways. Pilgrims gathered before the repaired gates of the Sanctum Imperialis and sang without instruction. Their hymns lacked precision. Their harmonies broke often, yet the sound carried peace instead of desperation. The Ministerum's preachers tried to join, found themselves overwhelmed, and wisely fell quiet. In the hives, the workers told rumors that the Emperor had breathed once and that breath still circled the planet, gentle as wind. Children born that week were said to arrive without the usual scream, opening their eyes as if surprised but unafraid. I sent my machines into the deeper vaults to test the conduits feeding the throne. They returned data too elegant to be accident. Voltage fluctuations forming repeating primes. A pattern of 3-beat intervals echoing the pilgrim's song outside. When I translated the numbers into sound, they formed a rhythm that no machine had written but every heart recognized. It was the pattern of breath. That evening, as the planet's shadow turned the void a softer shade of black, I stood with the Inquisitor on a balcony that overlooked the repaired dome. The Astronomican pulsed above us not as a single blinding pillar but as layered light, a gold core haloed by faint crimson. It did not dominate the stars. It conversed with them. "Do you think he's gone?" She asked. "No," I said. "Neither of them are." "Then what happened?" "They reached an understanding," I said. "God remembered he was man. Man remembered he could be more than punishment. Between those memories there is a bridge. We are walking on it now." She said nothing more. The silence between us was comfortable, like a room that had chosen not to echo. In the vaults below, the chain began to vibrate, a single, deliberate pulse that matched the rhythm of the throne. Sensors flared. Machine spirits murmured in reverence. The vibration faded, leaving behind only a faint trace of warmth, the way a handprint lingers on glass. Somewhere beyond the edge of the Astronomican's reach, a star no chart remembered brightened by a fraction of a fraction, as if something far from human influence had opened its eyes. The data said nothing more, but the silence afterward carried weight, like a promise that the universe was no longer asleep. The second morning came with rain, a rarity on Terra that felt like permission. It fell in thin, stubborn threads that stitched ash to stone and cooled the scars where the dome's edges had melted. The water ran in narrow rivers down the palace steps and through grates whose machine spirits had forgotten the luxury of cleansing. I walked the route the stranger had carved with his refusal, and found small changes that would never be recorded in any archive. A cracked tile someone had chosen not to replace so the line of the crack could remain honest. A wall relief wiped clean by a laborer's sleeve until the Emperor's face looked less like a mask and more like a burden shared. In the stasis vault, the chain pulsed again, one beat only, like a finger on a wrist. I fed the signal across a grid of logic engines and watched it echo through the palace in ways no physical conduit could explain. First, the chapel of the poor, then the cisterns, then the old mechanisms, then the whispering vents that carry the choir's breath between chambers. The pulse gathered small responses as it traveled, bells that did not ring, candles that did not gutter, mortals who paused mid-thought and discovered they were less alone than they believed. When the pulse reached the sanctum, the throne did not brighten. It listened. To listen is also to act. I found the Inquisitor where I expected, the archive hall's mezzanine, spine to a column, eyes on the living tide of serfs below. A scribal boy had fallen asleep on his ledger, ink drying on his cheek in the shape of a crescent blade. She noticed me and nodded toward the view.
They want a decree, she said.
Words to pin to their doors, a sentence that tells them where to put their awe. Give them work instead, I said. Work survives disappointment better than doctrine. She almost laughed, then did not. If I write that as an edict, the ecclesiarch will have me burned for economy of grace. The ecclesiarch burns only that which threatens to make sense, I said, and earned from her the kind of look that means agreement masked as rebuke. We stood together while the tide of humanity carried itself down the palace's arteries toward food, duty, sleep. None of them knew the name I had whispered into the data vaults when the mirror spoke it. Perhaps that was mercy. Names invite worship. Stories invite work. Reports continued to arrive, measured not in miracles but in tolerances. A forge ring on Mars cleared 0.1% more slag from its rails without modification. A void ship overdue by 7 years slid from the warp with its crew old but unbroken. Charts corrected by instincts they could not teach. On a shrine world where the statues of saints had long exuded oil, they wept clean water for a single hour, then returned to oil as if embarrassed by the extravagance. A ranger cohort of the Skitarii sent home a pict of a rust desert where wind carved new script overnight, loops and slashes that meant nothing, and then, for a moment, spelled the word stay in a dialect no one had taught the sand. In the palace kitchens, the servitors added a 5th beat to their chopping cycle, and the soup tasted more like food. In the execution halls, 3 pardons were issued with no clear sponsor. In the foundling wards, a sister of silence stood watch and discovered, to her astonishment and discomfort, that the infants did not cry when she came near. They stared solemnly as if learning subtraction from the air around her. These are not proofs. They are the angles from which proofs will later be carved. At midday, the custodian prime came to the vault. His armor had been repolished until it remembered ceremony, but the seam still held a memory of stress that good metal does not forget. He studied the chain in its field and addressed me without preamble. If I asked for your counsel as a man, he said, and not as a magos, what would you say we do with this? As a man, I said, and allowed my augmetics to be quiet long enough to make room for the answer. I would keep it where we can see it. Let it accuse us of whatever it wishes. Locks make relics political. Witness makes them useful. He inclined his head. And as a magos? As a magos, I said, I would map its pulse until the map stopped being of the chain and became of ourselves. Then I would keep drawing. We stood in companionable distrust of certainty. The Inquisitor joined us, her robe's hem still damp from rain. The High Lords will publish text by dusk, she said. It will say nothing and mean less, but it will be something to hold. She looked to the chain, to the throne beyond stone and distance, to the rain striking the broken crown still orbiting like a scab that refused to fall. I require a document from you both. Not for them. For whomever comes after us and needs a record that does not flatter. What do you want it to say? I asked. Exactly this, she said. We witnessed a conversation. It did not end, so we wrote. Not with the calligraphy the ecclesiarchy admires, nor with the sigil scripts the mechanicus trusts, but with the ugly precision of people who expect to be contradicted by their own future selves. We wrote that a myth entered our house and behaved like consequence. We wrote that a god listened and behaved like a man who knew the price of not listening. We wrote that the Astronomican changed its tone and ships found their way with fewer tears. We wrote that small mercies multiplied where no one could take credit. We wrote that none of this made us safe. As the light thinned, a courier arrived from a hospice ward near the Hab's northern ridge. A dying navigator, eyes bound in gold wire, had spoken a sentence clear enough that even the auspex in his pillow recorded it. It contained no theology, only a direction. Not higher, he said. Closer. I brought the recording to the sanctum and played it in the doorway, where my presence would not be an insult to the labor-mending stone and nerve. The sound rang and died without echo, which is one way stone admits respect. The throne's hum shifted by a fractional measure I might have imagined if the measuring engines had not agreed. Closer. Not a ladder, then. A bridge we could walk without breaking our knees on the rungs. Night came a second time. The storm cleared. Stars returned with their old arrogance and their new humility. I stood at the same window that had learned to be a window by losing its wall, and let the air pass through me until I could no longer tell if the chill on my skin was weather or hope. Below, the pilgrims slept where they had sung. Above, the crown of the shattered dome burned less each hour, its orbit decaying into a long farewell that would seed the sea with glass. I thought of the vault on Theta Null 7, of the mirror that had offered us a name, of a man whose history was a ledger of crimes committed against eternity in the service of surviving it. I thought of the Emperor on his throne, attended by machines that do not dream and choirs that cannot stop. Between them lay a silence that no longer felt like distance. The chain pulsed one last time, a heartbeat that belonged to neither and both, and was still. In the morning I will return to the numbers. I will coax meaning from reluctance and call it analysis. The Inquisitor will write a report stripped of adjectives where the truth hides in the lack of decoration. The Custodian Prime will resume the labor of preventing us from deserving what might be coming. The Ecclesiarch will hold up his hands to a crowd that has learned to sing without being told how. Ships will translate. Children will be born. Manufactorums will grind their teeth on ore and spit out weapons and saints with equal indifference. And somewhere, beyond the beacon, beneath it, beside it, in the place language goes when it refuses metaphor, a man who has killed gods will walk a road he did not burn behind him. He will not pray. He will remember. He will keep a promise none of us were strong enough to ask for. The Emperor will listen as far as the machines and the bones allow. He will remember too. I do not know what we are now. Better is a foolish word. Saved is a loud one. Perhaps we are merely closer, to each other, to the work, to the edge where faith and refusal shake hands and agree to keep the lights on. It is enough. The beacon hums. The palace breathes. The rain stops. The silence that follows is not empty. It is wide. The Imperium endures, stubborn as rust, luminous as oil, human despite itself. We look up. The light looks back, and for once neither of us blinks. The rain ended as if it had finished a sentence. Clouds thinned, leaving behind a sky so pale it seemed borrowed from another age. Workers climbed the last scaffolds to polish the new dome, each stroke a quiet denial that anything could ever be finished. From orbit, the palace looked unchanged, golden sprawl under smog. But those of us who had been inside knew its geometry had shifted, just enough to remind us that even stone listens when gods breathe differently. The chain rests now in a transparent reliquary at the center of the Sanctum Imperialis. The Custodian Prime placed it there himself. No liturgy, no flourish. When pilgrims approach, it does not glow. It hums faintly, a sound too low for microphones and too steady for accident. Some nights the hum syncs with the Astronomican's pulse. Others it keeps its own rhythm, as if content to disagree politely with the stars. The Inquisitor drafted her report and sealed it under 13 sigils. I read it once before transmission. It ends not with a conclusion, but with a question. What is devotion when gods and men share the same heartbeat? Her handwriting faltered at the last word. I like to believe it was because her hands remembered what awe feels like when it refuses to be fear. I continue my measurements. The waveform of the Astronomican still carries its double tone, gold and crimson, authority and defiance braided together. The Mechanicus believes it will decay back to normal. The Ecclesiarchy insists it is proof of sanctification. Both may be right, though neither truly hears it. The note itself endures, low and patient, less command than invitation. Sometimes when the palace sleeps, I climb to the broken parapet, where the first light touches the repaired dome. The horizon burns faintly red, not with fire, but with dawn's ordinary mercy. There, in the hum of distant engines and prayers too soft to catalog, I think I hear two voices continuing a conversation the rest of us only learn to overhear. One vast, weary golden, one mortal, stubborn, unfinished. If they still speak, may they never agree too easily. The universe survives on tension held, not released. And so the Imperium endures, its faith tempered, its gods reminded, its silence inhabited. The Astronomican burns steady above the cradle of mankind. The chain lies still but never cold. Somewhere, far beyond charted warp or memory, a man once called the God-Killer walks on, carrying in his scars the proof that even divinity must listen when humanity dares to speak.